Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to explore the hidden subconscious linguistic rules that we all use every single day, totally without even realizing it. You might think that when you talk to someone, you're just exchanging information, right? Just passing data from point A to point B. But actually, here's the truth. Every linguistic interaction is basically a high-stakes social negotiation. Literally, every time we open our mouths, we're navigating this incredibly complex, invisible matrix of social rules. And today, we're going to decode exactly how that whole matrix works. So let's start with a scenario I think we can all relate to. Imagine it's late at night, you're trying to sleep, but your younger neighbor is just blasting their music. In the source material, an older couple is dealing with this exact situation, and they propose two very different reactions. Listen to these. Reaction 1, I'm going to tell him to stop that awful noise right now. And reaction 2, perhaps you could just ask him if he's going to stop soon because it's getting a bit late and people need to get to sleep. Now, why do we intuitively know one of those approaches is an absolute social disaster waiting to happen? Even before we analyze the grammar, we kind of cringe a little at that first option, don't we? We recognize that stomping over there and making a blunt demand is absolutely going to create conflict. And this tells us something huge. It tells us that every linguistic interaction is actually a complex social negotiation. We are constantly, and I mean constantly, adjusting what we say based on exactly who we're talking to and the relationship we have with them. To really make sense of this negotiation, we have to look at how we measure social distance, which is basically determined by two main factors. First up, we've got external factors. Now, these are fixed before you even start talking. We're talking about things like age, status, and power. It's exactly why you might automatically use titles like Mrs. Clinton or Dr. Deng when you're speaking to someone of higher status, right? You're marking that social distance. But then on the flip side, we have internal factors, and these are super fluid. These are things like how friendly you feel, or maybe how much of a burden your request actually is. These are negotiated during the talk itself, so you might start a conversation calling someone Mr. Smith, but based on those fluid internal factors, you might end up calling him John by the time you're done talking. And right at the very center of this whole negotiation is a concept called face. Look, if you want to understand pragmatics, you absolutely have to understand face. Face is the ultimate currency of social interaction. As a technical term, it means the public self-image of a person. It's that core emotional and social sense of self that everyone has, and crucially, expects everyone else to recognize. Think about it. In almost every single everyday social interaction, we behave with the expectation that our face wants are going to be respected. We are constantly, vigilantly, trying to protect our own face and, of course, the face of the person we're talking to. Which naturally brings us to the face-threatening act. This happens when you say something that represents a direct threat to another individual's expectations about their self-image. Think back to our noisy neighbor scenario from earlier. That aggressive approach, I'm going to tell him to stop that awful noise right now. Well, that is a textbook face-threatening act. It directly challenges the neighbor's autonomy and their right to do whatever they want in their own space. It threatens their face, and that is exactly why it feels so incredibly uncomfortable to us, even just as observers. So how do we avoid these acts of social aggression? Well, we use politeness. But here's the catch. In linguistics, politeness isn't just about simple etiquette or, knowing which fancy salad fork to use at a dinner party. Not at all. Politeness is actually defined as the calculated means employed to show awareness of another person's face. It's what we call a face-saving act. Whenever we realize our words might threaten someone's face, we strategically use language to lessen that potential threat. But face isn't just one single, simple concept. It actually has two contrasting poles. We have negative face and we have positive face. Now, a really crucial point to keep in mind here, negative absolutely does not mean bad. It simply means the need to be independent, to have freedom of action, and to not be imposed upon. It's basically the desire to be left alone to do your own thing. Positive face, on the other hand, well, that's the need to be accepted, to be connected, and to be treated as a valued member of the group. So, just remember, negative face is all about independence, while positive face is all about connection. And this brilliantly illustrates how those two types of face totally dictate the strategies we use when we speak. Say we want to respect someone's negative face, their independence. We'd use a deference strategy. We keep things formal and impersonal, like saying, there's going to be a party if you can make it. See, it gives them an easy out. It doesn't impose. But if we're appealing to their positive face, their need for connection, we use a solidarity strategy. We emphasize closeness, and we use inclusive words like we, saying something like, come on, let's go to the party, we'll have fun. We subconsciously pick our words based entirely on which type of face we need to protect in that exact moment. Okay, let's move on and see how this plays out in a real-world setting. We're going to examine what is basically an absolute masterclass in social awkwardness from the source text, the pen scenario. Imagine you arrive at an important lecture. You reach into your bag and boom, disaster strikes. You don't have a pen. The person sitting right next to you, a total stranger, might have one. You are now self and they are other. How on earth do you get that pen without causing a catastrophic face threat? Well, you actually have this branching matrix of strategic choices. Your very first choice is whether to say anything at all. You might just rummage in your bag, sigh really heavily, and just hope they notice. That's the say nothing approach. If you do decide to speak, you can go off record and drop a hint like, I forgot my pen, which allows them to completely ignore you if they want to. Or you can address them directly, on record. Now, the most direct, blunt option is bald on record. Basically, give me a pen. But unless there's a literal emergency or you have some serious power over them, that is a massive face threat. No way. So instead, you use politeness. You might try positive politeness to build a quick, friendly connection, saying, how about letting me use your pen? Or, much more commonly with strangers, you use negative politeness to avoid imposing. You'd say, could you lend me a pen? Sometimes, though, our desire to protect negative face pushes us into absolutely hilarious extremes. Just look at this example of elaborate negative politeness from the text. Imagine turning to a stranger and saying, I know you're busy, but might I ask you if you happen to have an extra pen that I could, maybe borrow? It is so packed with hesitations, apologies for the imposition, and modal verbs. It's honestly an incredible display of linguistic mental gymnastics. And the whole shebang is designed to give the other person the total freedom to say no without feeling even a little bit bad. Looking at that completely tangled sentence, you really have to ask yourself, why do we make such a massive linguistic effort just to get a pen? I mean, from a purely data transfer perspective, give me a pen is much faster and obviously clearer. But we don't choose the efficient route. We choose the complex indirect structure because in human interaction, protecting face is significantly more important than efficiency. The effort we expend is quite literally a direct measure of our concern for the other person's social comfort. So, the crucial point here is that we are so terrified of face threats that we actually start saving face before the main event even happens. We use what linguists call pre-sequences. Seriously, think of these as the cheat codes of conversation. They're these little preliminary tests we run to figure out if it's safe to proceed with what we actually want to say, basically ensuring the other person is never backed into an uncomfortable corner. Let's look at how this conversational dance plays out when it's successful. First comes the pre-request. You ask, are you busy? Now, you aren't really asking for their schedule, right? You're asking if they're available to do a favor. Next is the go-ahead. They say, not really. The waters are safe. Only then do you proceed to the actual request. Check over this memo. By testing the waters first, you guarantee that your request won't impose on them at a bad time. But the true genius of the pre-sequence is what happens when things aren't safe. It basically provides a built-in eject button. You ask the same initial question, are you busy? But this time, they issue a stop response by saying, oh, sorry, implying they're just completely swamped. Notice what happens next. The actual request is completely avoided. You never actually asked them to check the memo, which means they never had to actually reject you. Both parties successfully avoid the face-threatening awkwardness of a denied request. It is a flawless social maneuver. Because we are so deeply programmed to understand these sequences, we often just skip right to the end. And this leads to interactions that make absolutely zero logical sense if you just look at the dictionary words. Take this exchange. She says, do you mind if I use your phone? He replies, yeah, sure. If you analyze that literally, yeah, sure to do you mind technically means yes, I do mind, so do not touch it. But obviously that's not how anyone interprets it. We process the underlying social intent. He's offering a positive response to the unstated request of, can I borrow this? Which perfectly proves that we listen to the pragmatic meaning, not just the literal vocabulary. Once you know about this, you're going to start noticing these pre-sequences absolutely everywhere in everyday life. We use pre-invitations when dating or making plans. You ask, what are you doing this Friday? And you wait for the nothing before you ever risk the face threat of saying, come over for dinner. Even children instinctively know this matrix. They use pre-announcements like, Mom, guess what happened? To check if the parent is actually willing to pay attention. If they get silence, which is a stop response, they know not to launch into their story just yet. It is a completely universal human behavior. We navigate power, distance, deference, solidarity, and face wants in a fraction of a second, in every single interaction. We choose elaborate, indirect sentences to protect the social balance. We run pre-sequences to test the waters. Even when we just sigh and loudly rummage in our bag for a pen, we're actively participating in this massive linguistic negotiation, which leaves us with this provocative thought to consider until next time. In a world where every single word is a carefully calculated social move, how much are you truly communicating when you decide to say nothing at all?